It's Tuesday, March 4th, 2025, a mixed bag of economic news, loose lip sync ice ops, and RFK Jr.'s Fox News op-ed is raising eyebrows. Next on the AM Update.
No room left for Mexico or for Canada. No, the tariffs, they're all set. They go into effect tomorrow.
What was so, I think, stunning to all of us in the Oval Office was that it was not clear Zelensky was going to go to negotiations at all.
Holman was upset, I suppose, because he felt that you were giving advice to people who were here illegally. Mm-hmm. Were you?
I was giving advice to all of my constituents. Yeah.
You know, from the time he left high school to 2 years later, something happened to that young man.
A lot to get to this morning, but last night, Attorney General Pam Bondi kind of broke her silence on Fox News about the Epstein files.
We all did. And the FBI handed over a couple hundred pages of documents. But, Sean, I gave them a deadline of Friday at 8 a.m. to get us everything. And a source had told me where the documents were being kept, Southern District of New York, shock. So we got them all by, hopefully all of them, Friday at 8 a.m., thousands of pages of documents. I have the FBI going through them, and Cash is also, now that we have Cash here, it's a game changer, of course, and Cash is going to, Director Patel is going to get us a detailed report as to why the FBI withheld all of those documents.
Okay, I'll take your word for it, Attorney General Bondi, saying that you've got a truckload of documents produced by the Southern District of New York. More on that Southern District of New York FBI field office in just a moment. But first, President Trump will address a joint session of Congress tonight, and he'll do so with some economic headwinds. A model utilized by the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta updated Monday. Its forecasts an even steeper economic contraction. The Atlanta Fed's GDP Now model had, up until February 28th, been forecasting growth between 2 to 4% in line with most other models. A graph on the GDP Now page lists the blue chip consensus average of the top 10 and bottom 10 forecasts at a slight tick more than 2% U.S. GDP growth for the first quarter of this year. But now that's been updated. They updated it on Monday with an even more pessimistic outlook, minus 2.8%. GDP contracting. In addition, Trump said Monday that those tariffs are going to be taking effect today on imports from Canada and Mexico. 25%. He says it's too late to change anything now.
No room left for Mexico or for Canada. No, the tariffs, they're all set. They go into effect tomorrow. And just so you understand, vast amounts of fentanyl have poured into our country from Mexico. And as you know, also from China, where it goes to Mexico and goes to Canada. And China also had an additional 10, so it's 10 plus 10.
It wasn't all bad economic news, though. Not that tariffs are bad news, because it actually resulted in one of the good news stories we'll be talking about a little bit later. On Ukraine, Donald Trump paused all shipments of U.S. weapons to that country last night, the latest move after that disastrous for Ukraine meeting between Vladimir Zelensky, Vice President J.D. Vance, and President Donald Trump. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz was the one who, along with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, actually kicked Zelensky out of the White House. Here is Waltz on CNN just the other day talking about what went down.
What was so, I think, stunning to all of us in the Oval Office was that it was not clear Zelensky was going to go to negotiations at all, that he would ever be able to negotiate with Putin, and whether he shared our goal of ending this war. So what I made clear as Secretary Rubio, and I said, look, this cannot proceed, was that this was a huge missed opportunity for him and for his country. He could have left the White House on Friday on the heels of an engagement with President Macron of France, with Prime Minister Starmer of the United Kingdom, where they were talking about European boots on the ground, security guarantees for Ukraine, a positive movement towards ending this war, and having Ukraine and the United States being bound together for a generation economically.
That is National Security Advisor Mike Waltz just going through what actually happened after that meeting with Zelensky between Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, Vice President Vance. He was actually, along with Rubio, one of the people who told who told Zelensky to leave the White House and got into his thinking on why he did so. Last night, also on Fox News, Vice President J.D. Vance provided some more insight on just what happened with the Ukrainians and their visit to the White House on Friday.
It was supposed to be ceremonial. You know, there had been some public back and forth, some disagreements, some words spoken in public, and the president was like, let's have this moment. We give some credit to the brave Ukrainian fighters, and of course, it's a very brave army that they have there in Ukraine. Let's sign this minerals deal, which importantly does two things. It allows the American people to get some of their money back, but it also shows the Ukrainian people that America has a long-term investment in their sovereignty. You do those things, we'll sign this thing, we'll have a rah-rah moment, and then we'll get to the tough talk of negotiating peace. We couldn't even get the Ukrainians to a point where they could talk about the peaceful settlement.
What a recalcitrant group of people. It seems like the Ukrainian delegation was and is. Here is Senator Mark Kelly on Inside with Jen Psaki on MSNBC, warning to men your T level will plummet after hearing this.
Zelensky you attended by a bipartisan group. What was that like, and what was the response in the private room to him?
Well, Jen, I think we all have a little bit of PTSD, even though we weren't in the Oval Office meeting, right? I think all of us, a lot of people across the country collectively.
Oh, my gosh. Seriously, man. You've got PTSD from hearing grown men disagree with each other. Give me a freaking break, Senator Kelly. Update on Pope Francis. He suffered 2 new acute respiratory crises on Monday and was put back on non-invasive mechanical ventilation. That's another setback to his battle to fight pneumonia. Doctors extracted copious amounts of mucus from his lungs during 2 bronchoscopies in which a camera-tipped tube was sent down his airways with a sucker at the tip to suction out fluid. The Vatican said the mucus was in his body's reaction to the original pneumonia infection and not a new infection, given laboratory tests don't indicate any new bacteria. It's a story we're still going to keep an eye on, of course. Along with this one, yet another ICE deportation operation was allegedly leaked to some left-wing citizen journalist. This journalist told the would-be deportees to plan accordingly for ICE raids in Northern Virginia. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has hosted a webinar aimed at illegals and telling them how they can be prepared and plan accordingly as well. She was interviewed by NPR and says she has no regrets.
You had a recent dispute, if that's the right word, with Tom Homan, the president's Homeland Security czar, so-called. You held an online forum, a Know Your Rights forum, that he didn't like. What were you doing? What was your goal as you saw it?
My job is to educate and act as a liaison of critical information to my constituents. And I was informing all of my constituents of their constitutional protections, and in particular, their constitutional protections against illegal search and seizure in the United States.
Holman was upset, I suppose, because he felt that you were giving advice to people who were here illegally. Were you?
I was giving advice to all of my constituents.
Yeah, I was giving advice to illegal aliens. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says there, you know what? Some people need to go to jail. Some people need to go to prison for a very long time for these leaks. No, it's not freedom of speech. It's called obstruction of justice. I think that fits the bill pretty well. Well, there's a knife-wielding maniac in Boston over the weekend who was subdued by an off-duty police officer who shot him to death. Naturally, Boston's Marxist mayor, Michelle Wu, had some words of condolence.
My condolences and all of our thoughts are with the family of the individual whose life has been lost.
Our thoughts and prayers are with the family and friends of the individual who's been lost.
Yeah, that is Michelle Wu, Boston mayor, along with Kevin Hayden, Suffolk County District Attorney, both with condolences, not for the would-be victims of this knife-wielding maniac, but for the knife-wielding maniac himself. Just totally upside down clown world stuff. And Michelle Wu actually doubled down yesterday saying, no, I still feel really sorry for the maniac who was shot, rightfully so, by the police officer. In New York, former Governor Andrew Cuomo says he's running for New York City mayor. Of course, for reasons only Allah knows, one of his closing pitches in his announcement speech was touting his COVID record.
And everyone did their part. Everyone did their part. Everyone held their position. And we kept this place, this great place running, and we saved lives and we led the nation. So can we handle this challenge?
Yeah, every night at bedtime, I ask my son, let's talk about your day. And we go through his day, what he did, what he didn't like, what he liked. And sometimes he just makes stuff up. I've been with him the entire day. All 12 hours or however long it ends up being. Been with him all day. I know every step of his day. And sometimes he'll just make stuff up. Like, buddy, I don't remember this detail the way that you do. That's kind of what it sounds like talking to Andrew Cuomo there, recounting his record on COVID as he announces his bid for New York City mayor. A few quick hitters here before our first break. A D.C.-based federal district judge ruled late Saturday evening over the weekend President Donald Trump's firing of the head of the Office of Special Counsel was unlawful, keeping him in his post. The Trump administration filed their notice of appeal shortly thereafter. Hampton Dellinger, appointed by former President Joe Biden to head the Office of Special Counsel, sued the Trump administration in Washington, D.C. federal court after his February 7th firing. D.C. District Judge Amy Berman Jackson wrote in the Saturday filing, the court's ruling that Dellinger's firing was unlawful is consistent with Supreme Court precedent. Head of the FBI field office in New York has resigned after the Department of Justice accused his office of hiding thousands of Epstein documents. James Dennehy says he was forced to resign in an email to staff. Late Friday, he says, in the notice, I was informed that I needed to put my retirement papers in today, which I just did. I was not given a reason for this decision. Dennehy had previously told his office to dig in after Trump was elected. The resignation comes after Attorney General Pam Bondi instructed FBI Director Kash Patel to launch an investigation into claims that the New York field office was hiding thousands of Epstein-related documents. Bondi said a source came forward claiming the field office had thousands of pages of those documents. When we come back, the New York Post did, or at least tried to do, an investigative report on one Thomas Matthew Crooks. That would be the would-be Trump assassin number one. We have a couple of legitimately good news stories to talk about when it comes to the economy. And RFK Jr. turns some heads and raises some eyebrows with his recent op-ed over at foxnews.com. We'll talk about all that and more coming up next.
Why did he do it? I said why I thought, and I really to this day believe evil. You know, from time he left high school to 2 years later, something happened to that young man during that time frame. And I'm a firm believer, and as we talked earlier, Dan, about my current job in the religion, I believe evil is in the world. The devil has hit the world. It has always been in the world. But I think the devil really inflicted him, caused him to snap, and that's why he did it.
That is the voice of the guidance counselor, the high school guidance counselor for Thomas Matthew Crooks, the would-be Trump assassin number one, who came within just less than an inch of assassinating Donald Trump and changing really the course of modern human history. He was interviewed, that guidance counselor, by the New York Post as part of an investigative report, a part of which actually revealed a private investigator believing that Thomas Matthew Crooks did not act alone. That investigative report also spanned, the whole report was about 8 minutes long. I watched the whole thing yesterday. Interviewed several people who knew Crooks personally, and basically none of them had anything bad to say about him. That's what makes that report so jarring, is that everybody who knew him had nothing even remotely negative to say about him, and his guidance counselor just basically says, yes, that's demonic oppression or demonic influence, without actually saying that explicitly. Again, that was an investigative report from the New York Post, which was published yesterday. Quick little hitter here. Failed 2024 Democrat vice presidential nominee Tim Walz has said he would certainly consider running for president in 2028, despite his crushing defeat alongside then Vice President Kamala Harris. He told the New Yorker Radio Hour over the weekend, look, I never had an ambition to be president or vice president. It was an honor to be asked. I feel I can serve, I will, and if nationally people are like, dude, we tried you and look how that worked out, I'm good with that as well. Please, 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 whatever deity you pray to, pray that Tim Walz runs for president in 2028. And I promise some good news on the economic front in the face of some of that heebie-jeebie news when it comes to the GDP. Here's this. Honda is scrapping plans to produce its next Civic model in Mexico, and it's moving production to Indiana to avoid President Trump's tariffs. The Japanese auto giant had initially planned to manufacture the next generation Civic in Mexico starting in November of 2027. And now Honda plans to manufacture the Civic in Indiana starting in May of 2028, turning out around 210,000 vehicles a year. That's according to a report from Reuters. So already these tariffs that everybody said, oh, you can't do tariffs, it's already paying dividends. And then there's this story. This might have been swept under the radar as a multinational corporation with an acronym for a name, promising an investment in the United States. You might have kind of swept this under the rug, but this is a huge freaking deal. Semiconductor giant Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company announced a $100 billion investment in the U.S. on Monday. TSMC, a Taiwan-based chip maker that builds advanced semiconductors, which are used to power smartphones and artificial intelligence models, announced the investment following meetings with President Donald Trump. The investment is expected to focus on advanced semiconductor manufacturing facilities over the next 4 years. TSMC has previously invested in a chip factory in Arizona with an initial $12 billion investment, and last April it announced an additional investment of $25 billion to add a third factory at its Arizona facility by 2030 to bring its total investment there to $65 billion. So, who does TSMC make semiconductors and chips for? Only these little piddly companies like Apple, Nvidia, Qualcomm. This has been, and it's been a long time coming and a long time necessary, the reshoring of critical technology like semiconductors and chips, microchips, to the United States, so that we're not totally dependent on Taiwan, totally dependent on China, really, is what we're talking about here, and everything that could be going down over there. This is a huge freaking deal. Donald Trump made the announcement alongside the CEO of TSMC yesterday.
Today, Taiwan Semiconductor is announcing that they will be investing at least $100 billion in new capital in the United States over the next short period of time to build state-of-the-art semiconductor manufacturing facilities. I think mostly it's going to be in Arizona, which is what I understand, which is a great state. I like it because I won it, but I won most of them, actually. But I did. We won it, and we won it big. The most powerful AI chips in the world will be made right here in America, and it'll be a big percentage of the chips made by his company. But as you know, they're based mostly in Taiwan.
Trump also said, quote, we'll be close to 40% of the chips market, the microchip market, with this transaction and a couple of others that we are doing. Okay, again, we need some of the actions taken by DOJ. We need those enacted. We need those codified into law. And that's going to rely on a broken Congress to do so. If you want to look at lasting results from the second Trump administration already, here 6 weeks in, reshoring and biting a huge chunk of chip manufacturing out of the global market, just within 6 weeks, that is a lasting accomplishment, and that's good news. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent discussed the economy on CBS News recently and said it could be a little while before things can fully turn around, but he doubled down and underscored President Trump's commitment to completely reshaping and remaking and rebuilding the American economy.
What I find interesting is for the past year and a half and during the campaign, most of the media said, oh, the economy is great. It's just a vibe session. Now that President Trump's in office, there's an economic problem. And I'll tell you what the problem was.
We were pretty straightforward on this program.
Well, I haven't seen this program, but in general, this idea that working class Americans didn't know what they were talking about. They didn't know their lived experience. They didn't know what their pocketbooks were feeling. And I'll tell you, President Trump was elected. One of the reasons was the affordability crisis, and we are setting about doing that. So after 4 years of disastrous policies, we're running these gigantic deficits that that led to the affordability problem. Massive government regulation. So what we had was a demand shock from the government spending that was met by supply constraints with overregulation. So we are in the process of deregulating, which will free the supply side, and we are cutting back the government spending. It took 4 years to get us here. President Trump's been in office 5 weeks, and I can tell you we're working every day. What I will point out, interest rates, the 10-year bond, which I am focused on, have been down every week since President Trump was president. Mortgage rates have been down every week. So that's a pretty good start.
And it's not just all talk with Treasury Secretary Bessent, because the Treasury Department announced this week it's not going to enforce a Biden-era small business rule intended to curb money laundering and shell company formation. In a Sunday evening announcement, the Treasury said in a news release it would not impose penalties now or in the future if companies fail to register for the agency's beneficial ownership information database that was created during the Biden administration. Despite efforts by small businesses to undo the rule in courts, it remains in effect officially. On Sunday, President Trump on his Truth social media site praised the suspension of enforcement of the rule and said the database is outrageous and invasive. I've seen several reactions to this, basically, for all intents and purposes, it is the suspending of this rule. And I've seen a lot of people saying this is really going to be a big deal, especially for small businesses. Deregulation is something that can happen as close, in federal government terms, can happen as close to overnight as anything. And I know that's not really, that's not exactly true, but it's as close as possible. And deregulation will hopefully help spur the economy sooner than later. When we come back, RFK Jr., new Secretary of HHS, turned heads with an op-ed at foxnews.com. We'll talk about it next. And finally, air analysis. RFK Jr., new head of the Department of Health and Human Services, wrote this op-ed for Fox News titled "Measles Outbreak is Call to Action for All of Us." Subhead: MMR vaccine is crucial to avoiding potentially deadly disease. As the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, I'm deeply concerned about the recent measles outbreak. The situation has escalated rapidly, with the Texas Department of State Health Services reporting 146 confirmed cases since late January of 2025, primarily in the South Plains region. Tragically, this outbreak has claimed the life of a school-aged child, the first measles-related fatality in the United States in over a decade. So first point of order there in this RFK Jr. op-ed. I have read that this child who tragically passed away had another pretty serious infection before the measles contraction, developed pneumonia, and then got measles. So we're back to the COVID-era mantra of, did he die from measles or with measles? But then there's this block quote that's gotten a lot of attention. RFK Jr. says in this op-ed, quote, "Vaccines not only protect individual children from measles, but also contribute to community immunity, protecting those who are unable to be vaccinated due to medical reasons." Did RFK Jr. write that? Because that sounds like a completely different guy than the one the media themselves billed him as. Here's what I think is actually happening here. And again, I'll give maybe one or two more, or maybe two or three more benefits of the doubt to RFK Jr. before I start to have real concerns here. I think some, or maybe a cadre of senators during the confirmation process, went to RFK Jr. and said, we're not voting for you unless you basically fillet Big Pharma 2 or 3 times in your first 6 months. Write an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal. Write an op-ed for Fox News. Let people know. Let people know that you're not a weirdo. You're not a kook. I don't know. I don't know why this popped in my head, but would it not surprise you if like a Bill Cassidy, or think of another senator that was maybe on the fence about supporting him, a cadre of senators went to RFK Jr. and said, we'll support your nomination. We'll vote for your confirmation. But you got to give us something too. You got to let the country know you're not a kook, so we're not embarrassed by our vote here in a few weeks. I wonder if something like that happened when it comes to RFK Jr. and this op-ed. What do you think? Let me know at Real AM Update on X. We'll be back at it again tomorrow. That's it for Tuesday. See you then. I'm Aaron McIntyre, and this is the AM Update.